Marcus Sterling lived in the biggest house anyone had ever seen. It sat on top of a hill like a giant castle made of white stone and glass windows that sparkled in the sunlight. People in the town below would point up at it and whisper stories about the man who lived inside. They called him the Silent King because he never spoke to anyone. He never came down from his mansion. He never smiled or waved. He just stayed locked away in his big, lonely house. But Marcus wasn't silent by choice. He was born deaf. He couldn't hear the birds singing outside his windows. He couldn't hear the rain tapping on the roof. He couldn't hear music or laughter, or even his own voice. The world had always been completely quiet for Marcus, and over the years, that silence had built walls around his heart. Marcus was only 30 years old, but he looked much older. His face was always serious, with lines across his forehead from frowning so much. His dark hair was always perfectly combed, and he wore expensive suits even though no one ever visited him. He had more money than he could ever spend, but money couldn't buy him the one thing he wanted most: a friend. Someone who understood him. Every day was exactly the same for Marcus. He would wake up in his enormous bedroom, eat breakfast alone at a table that could seat 20 people, work on his computer in his office, and then go to bed. The mansion had 40 rooms, but Marcus only used 5 of them. The rest stayed empty and cold, filled with furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts. Marcus had hired many maids and butlers over the years, but none of them stayed long. They found him too difficult, too angry, too cold. Marcus would write them notes to tell them what to do because he couldn't speak clearly. But his notes were always harsh and demanding. He never said please or thank you. He never looked them in the eye. Most workers quit after just 1 week. Then Elena arrived. Elena was 25 years old with kind brown eyes and black hair that she tied back in a simple ponytail. She wasn't like the other maids who had worked for Marcus before. She didn't come from a rich family or a fancy school. Elena grew up poor in a small village where everyone helped each other. Her mother had taught her that every person deserves kindness, no matter how difficult they seem on the outside. Elena needed this job desperately. Her younger brother was sick and needed medicine that cost a lot of money. When she heard that Marcus Sterling was looking for a new maid and that he paid very well, she knew she had to try. Everyone warned her about him. They said he was mean and impossible to work for. But Elena didn't care. She needed to help her brother, and she wasn't afraid of hard work. On her first day, Elena walked up the long driveway to the mansion with her heart pounding. The house was even bigger up close. It made her feel very small. She knocked on the huge wooden door and waited. After a long minute, the door opened. Marcus stood there in a black suit, looking down at her with cold gray eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't say hello. He just handed her a piece of paper with instructions written in neat handwriting. The note said she should follow him and not ask questions. Elena followed Marcus through the mansion. Her shoes clicked on the marble floors as they walked past rooms filled with paintings and sculptures and furniture that probably cost more than her entire village. Everything was perfect and clean, but it felt dead somehow. Like a museum instead of a home. Marcus showed Elena what her duties would be. She had to clean certain rooms, prepare his meals, and wash his clothes. He wrote everything down on paper instead of speaking. Elena noticed how his hands moved gracefully when he wrote, and she wondered what it must be like to live in complete silence. For the first few days, Elena did exactly what Marcus asked. She cleaned quietly and left his meals on the dining table before disappearing. But she noticed things that made her heart hurt. Marcus always ate alone. He never turned on the television or the radio. He spent hours just sitting by the window, staring out at nothing. One afternoon, Elena was cleaning the hallway near Marcus's office when she saw something that surprised her. Marcus was standing in front of a large painting of a woman. He was touching the frame gently, and his shoulders were shaking. Elena realized with a shock that he was crying. She quickly moved away before he could see her, but the image stayed in her mind. This cold, angry man was actually deeply sad. Something terrible must have happened to make him lock himself away from the world like this. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Marcus and his lonely life. She decided that even if he didn't want kindness, she would give it to him anyway. Her mother always said that the people who act the meanest are often the ones who need love the most. The next morning, Elena did something different. When she brought Marcus his breakfast, she didn't just leave it on the table. She waited until he looked at her, and then she smiled. A real, warm smile. Marcus looked shocked. He stared at her like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he quickly looked away and waved his hand for her to leave. But Elena had seen something flicker in his eyes. Just for a second. A tiny bit of surprise. Maybe even hope. She kept smiling at him every day after that. She started leaving little notes next to his meals. Simple, kind words like, "I hope you have a good day," or "The sunshine is beautiful today." Marcus never responded, but Elena noticed he stopped throwing the notes away. Sometimes she would find them folded carefully on his desk. Slowly, something began to change in the mansion. The air felt a little less heavy. Marcus started looking at Elena when she entered rooms instead of ignoring her. He still didn't smile, but his notes to her became less harsh. He started writing "please" and "thank you." Then one evening, Elena was cleaning the library when she noticed something strange. There was a door hidden behind a bookshelf, and it was slightly open. She had never seen this door before. Soft light was coming from behind it. Elena knew she shouldn't look. It wasn't her business. But her curiosity was too strong. She walked slowly toward the hidden door and peeked inside. What she saw made her gasp. The secret room was filled with something Marcus had kept hidden from everyone. Something that would explain everything. Something that would change both their lives forever. Elena pushed the hidden door open wider and stepped inside the secret room. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. The room was small and warm, nothing like the cold, empty rooms in the rest of the mansion. The walls were covered with deep red wallpaper, and a single lamp glowed softly in the corner. But what made Elena freeze in place was what sat in the center of the room on a small wooden table. A music box. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The box was made of dark wood with gold designs carved all over it. On top of the box was a tiny dancer frozen in mid-spin, her arms raised gracefully above her head. Elena
Marcus
walked
Sterling
closer,
lived
in the biggest
almost like the
house
music
anyone
box
had
was
ever
calling
seen
to her.
It sat
She
on top
noticed
of
something
a hill
else,
like
too.
a giant
All
castle
around the room,
made of white
covering
stone
every
and
inch
glass
of the
windows
walls,
that
were
sparkled in the
photographs.
sunlight.
Old
People in the
photographs
town
in
below
wooden
would point up
frames.
at it,
And
Elena
whisper
looked at them
stories
closely
about the man
and
who
realized
lived
they were
inside.
all pictures
They
of
called
the
him the
same
Silent
woman.
King
The
because
woman
he
from the
never
painting
spoke to
Marcus
anyone.
had been
He
crying
never
in front
came
of.
down from his mansion.
She was beautiful.
He never
with
smiled
long dark
or
hair
waved.
and a
He
smile
just stayed
that lit
locked
up her
away
whole
in his
face.
big, lonely
In some
house.
pictures, she
But
was young,
Marcus wasn't
maybe 20
silent
years
by
old.
choice.
In
He was
others,
born deaf.
she looked older but
He couldn't
still
hear
happy.
the birds
And in
singing
many of the
outside
photos,
his windows.
she was holding
He
a small
couldn't hear
boy
the
with
rain
dark
tapping on the
hair
roof.
and serious
He
gray
couldn't
eyes.
hear music or laughter.
Elena felt her
or
chest tighten.
even his own
The
voice.
little boy was Marcus.
The world had always
These
been
were pictures of
completely
Marcus
quiet for
as a
Marcus.
child with his mother.
And over the years,
In one photograph,
that silence had built
young
walls
Marcus
around
was
his
sitting
heart.
at a piano
Marcus
with his
was
mother
only
beside
30
him.
years old.
Her hands
but he
were on the
looked much
piano
older.
keys,
His
and
face
she was
laughing.
always serious.
Marcus was looking
with
up at
lines
her
across his
with
forehead
so much
from
love in his
frowning
eyes.
so much.
Elena had
His
never
dark hair
seen
was
Marcus look
always
that way.
perfectly combed,
So open,
and he wore
so
expensive
full of
suits,
joy.
even though no
Elena
one
picked up
ever
another
visited
photograph
him.
from the table.
He had more money
This
than
one
he
showed
could ever
Marcus's
spend,
mother holding
but
the
money
exact
couldn't
same
buy
music
him the
box
one
that
thing
was
he
sitting
wanted
in front of her
most.
now.
A friend.
She was winding it up.
Someone who
and
understood
little
him.
Marcus was
Every
watching
day
her with wonder
was
on
exactly
his
the
face.
same for Marcus.
Elena's hands trembled
He would wake
as
up
she
in his
reached for the
enormous
music
bedroom,
box.
eat
She
breakfast
knew she
alone at a
shouldn't touch
table
it.
that could seat
This was
20
clearly
people,
something
work
very
on his
private
computer
and
in his office,
precious to Marcus.
and then go to bed.
But something
The
inside
mansion
her
had
needed
40
to know what
rooms,
was so
but
special about
Marcus
this
only
box.
used 5 of them.
Why would Marcus
the rest
keep it
stayed
hidden in a
empty
secret
and
room?
cold, filled
Why would
with
he
furniture
surround it
covered
with
in
pictures
white
of his
sheets
mother?
like ghosts?
She carefully
Marcus
lifted the
had
lid
hired
of the
many
music
maids
box.
and butlers
Nothing
over the
happened,
years,
but
no
none of
music
them stayed
played.
long.
The
They
tiny
found him
dancer
too
didn't
difficult,
spin.
too
Elena
angry,
looked inside,
too cold.
and saw a small
Marcus
key
would write
lying
them
at the
notes to
bottom.
tell them what to do.
She picked it up
he
and
couldn't
turned it
speak
gently.
clearly.
The
But his
mechanism
notes were
inside the
always
box
harsh
began to
and
wind
demanding.
up with a soft
He never
clicking
said please
sound.
or
Then
thank you.
Elena closed
He
the
never
lid
looked them in the
and
eye.
watched.
Most
The
workers
dancer
quit
began to
after
turn
just
slowly,
1 week,
spinning
then
in perfect
Elena
circles.
arrived. But still,
Elena was
there
25
no
years
music.
old with kind
the
brown
box was
eyes and
completely
black hair
silent,
that she tied back
just
in
like
a simple
Marcus's
ponytail.
world.
Elena
wasn't
felt
like the other
tears
maids
burn
who
in
had
her
worked
eyes.
for Marcus before.
She finally
didn't come
understood.
from a rich family.
This music box
or a
must have
fancy
played
school.
beautiful music.
Elena
once.
grew up poor in
Marcus's
a small
mother
village
must have
where
wound
everyone
up for
helped
him
each other
when he was little.
Her mother had taught her
Marcus
that
had
every
never been
person
able to
deserves
hear it.
kindness.
He could only watch
no
the
matter
dancers
how
spin in
difficult
silence
they seem
while
on the outside.
everyone else heard the melody.
Elena needed this
Suddenly,
job desperately.
The door behind
her younger brother
Elena
was slammed
and
open
needed
with a
medicine
bang
that
shook
cost
the
a
walls.
lot of money. She
When
spun
she
around
heard that
and
Marcus
saw Marcus
Sterling was
standing
looking
in the
for a new
doorway.
maid, his
and that
face
he
was
paid
twisted
very
with
well.
anger, like
she knew
she
had
had
to try.
never seen before.
Everyone warned her
His
about
gray
him.
eyes
They
were
said he
blazing,
was mean,
and his hands were clenched
impossible
into
to work
fists
for.
at his sides.
But Elena
he
didn't
rushed
care.
into the room and
She needed
grabbed
to
the
help
music
her brother,
box from her
and
hands,
she wasn't
holding
afraid
it close
of hard
to his
work.
chest, like
On her
she
first
might
day,
steal it.
Elena
Then
walked
he
up the
pointed at
long
the door
driveway to
with
the
a shaking
mansion with
finger.
her heart pounding.
His message was clear.
The house was even
Get out.
bigger up close.
Now.
It made
Elena
her feel
opened her
very
mouth
small.
to apologize. She knocked
But
on the
Marcus
huge
grabbed a
wooden
piece of
door
paper from his
and
pocket
waited
and
after a
scribbled
long
something
minute,
in it.
fast
The door
and
opened.
messy. Marcus
He shoved
stood
the
there
note
in a
into her
black
hands,
suit,
looking
said,
down at her with
"You're
cold
fired.
gray eyes.
Leave my house
He didn't
immediately."
smile. He didn't
Tears
say hello.
streamed down Elena's
He just
face.
handed her a piece of
"Please,"
paper with
she said
instructions
out loud.
written in neat handwriting.
Even though she knew he
the note
couldn't hear
said
her.
she should follow
"I'm
him
so
and not ask
sorry.
questions. I didn't mean
Elena
to invade your
followed
privacy.
Marcus through the
I
mansion.
just wanted to understand."
Her shoes clicked on
but
the marble
Marcus
floors
wasn't
as they
looking
walked
at her
past
face.
rooms filled with
He couldn't read her
paintings and
lips
sculptures
because
and
he had
furniture
turned away.
that probably cost
He was
more
carefully
than her
placing the
entire
music
village.
box back on the table.
Everything was perfect
His hands
and
gentle
clean,
despite his
but
anger.
it felt dead somehow.
Elena could see his
like
shoulders
a museum
shaking
instead
again.
of a home.
He was trying
Marcus
not to cry.
showed Elena what her
took a
duties
step
would
toward
be,
him. She
and
had to
did
clean
something
certain
brave.
rooms, prepare
She
his
touched
meals,
his shoulder
and wash
lightly.
his clothes.
Marcus
He
jumped
wrote
and
everything
turned to
down on
face her.
paper instead
She
of
pointed to
speaking.
her eyes, and
Elena
then to the
noticed how his
photographs on the
hands
wall.
moved gracefully
Then
when
she
he
placed
wrote,
her hand
and
over
she
her heart.
wondered what it must
She
be
was
like
trying
to
to tell
live
him,
in complete
"I
silence.
see her.
For the
I
first
see your
few
pain."
days, Elena did
For
exactly
just a
what
moment,
Marcus asked.
Marcus's
She
angry
cleaned
expression
quietly
cracked,
and left his
his
meals on
eyes
the
filled
dining
with
table
tears,
before
and
disappearing.
he looked so lost
But she
and
noticed
broken
things that
made her
Elena
heart
wanted to
hurt.
hug him.
Marcus
But then his
always
face
stayed
hardened
alone.
again.
He never
He
turned
pointed
on
to
the
the television
television
or the
more.
radio.
Elena
He
had
spent
no
hours
choice.
just sitting by the window.
She walked slowly
staring
out
out
of
at
the
the secret
nothing.
room with her
One
head down.
afternoon,
Marcus
Elena was
followed
cleaning
her
the hallway
and
near
slammed
Marcus's
the door
office
shut behind them.
when she saw
He
something
stood in
that
front of it
surprised
like a
her.
guard protecting
Marcus
treasure.
was standing in front
Elena
of a
gathered
large
her
painting
few
of a
belongings
woman.
from her small
He was
room
touching
near
the
the
frame
kitchen.
gently.
Her heart
and his
felt
shoulders
like
were
it was
shaking.
breaking into pieces.
Elena realized with
not
a shock
because
that
she
she
lost her
crying.
job,
She
although
quickly
she
moved
desperately
away before
needed
he
the
could
money
see
for
her.
her brother's
But the
medicine.
image stayed in her
because
mind.
she felt like she had
This
just
cold,
hurt someone who
angry
was
man
already
was
in so
actually
much
deeply
pain.
sad.
She was
Something
walking toward the front
terrible
door with her
must have
bag
happened to
when
make
she
him
heard
lock a
himself
loud
away
knock.
from the world like
Elena
this.
froze.
That night,
Marcus looked
Elena
confused
couldn't
too.
sleep. No one
She kept
ever
thinking about
visited
Marcus
him.
and his
no
lonely
one
life.
ever knocked on his door.
She decided that
Marcus
even
walked
if he
to the
didn't want
entrance
kindness
and open it,
she would give it to
Standing
him.
on the doorstep
Anyway,
was an old woman.
Her mother always
maybe
said
70
that the
years
people who
old,
act the
with
meanest
silver
are often
hair
the ones who
and
need love
kind
the
eyes
most.
that looked
The next
exactly
morning,
like the woman.
Elena
in all
did
the
something
photographs.
different.
When
Elena
she brought
gasped.
Marcus's breakfast,
Could this be Marcus's
she didn't just
grandmother?
leave it on the table.
His aunt?
She
The
waited
old
until
woman
he looked at
her,
Marcus,
and then
and
she
immediately
smiled.
her eyes
A
filled
real,
with tears.
warm smile.
She reached out,
Marcus
and
touched
touched
his
his face
face
gently.
He stared
Marcus
at her like
stumbled
he
backward,
couldn't
like
believe
he had
what
seen
he
a
was
ghost.
seeing.
His
Then
whole body
he
was
quickly
shaking.
looked away.
The
and
old
waved
woman
his
pulled an
hand for her to
envelope
leave.
from her purse,
But Elena
and
had
handed
seen
it to something
Marcus.
flicker in his eyes.
He opened it with
just for a
trembling
second,
hands and read
a
whatever
tiny
was
bit of
inside.
surprise.
As his
Maybe even
eyes
hope.
moved across the
She
word,
kept smiling at
his
him
face every
when
day after
completely
that.
white.
She
He
started
looked like
leaving
he might
little
faint.
notes next to his
The
meals.
old woman started
Simple,
talking,
kind
her
words
lips like,
moving quickly.
"I hope you have a good
Marcus
day,"
was reading
or
her lips.
"The sunshine
Something
is
Elena
beautiful today."
realized he must have learned
Marcus
to do
never
over
responded,
the years.
but Elena
Whatever the
noticed
woman
he
was
stopped
saying
throwing
made
the notes
Marcus's
away.
hands
Sometimes
shake
she
so
would find
hard
them
that he
folded
dropped the letter.
carefully on his desk.
Elena rushed forward
slowly
and
picked
something
it up
began
without
to
thinking.
change in the mansion.
Her eyes
the
scanned
air
the
felt
words
a
quickly.
little less heavy.
What she read
Marcus
made her
started
dizzy
looking
with
at
shock.
Elena when she
The letter
entered
was from
rooms
Marcus's
instead of
mother,
ignoring her.
written
He
25
still
years
didn't
ago.
smile, and
but
it
it
revealed
revealed
to
a
her
secret
became less
that
harsh.
explained everything.
He started writing
A secret about the music box.
Then one
secret about
evening,
why Marcus
Elena
had
was
locked
cleaning the
himself away
library
from the world.
when she noticed
A secret
something
about
strange.
something his mother
There
had
was a
hidden
door
inside
hidden
that
behind a
music
bookshelf
box
before she
and
died.
it was slightly
Something
open.
that could change
She
Marcus's
had never
life
seen
forever.
this door before.
Elena looked up at
Soft
Marcus.
light was coming from
He was
behind
staring
it.
at the old
Elena
woman
knew
with
she
tears
shouldn't
streaming
look.
down his face.
It wasn't her business.
Then he turned and
but her
ran
curiosity
back toward the secret
was
room.
too strong.
Elena
She
and
walked
the old
slowly
woman
toward the hidden
exchanged
door
glances
and peeked inside.
Without speaking,
What she
they
saw
both
made her
knew what
gasp.
they had to do.
The secret room
They
was
followed
filled with
Marcus
something
back to the
Marcus
hidden
had
room.
kept hidden
When
from
they
everyone.
arrived, Something
Marcus
that would
was standing
explain
in front of the
everything.
music box with the
Something
letter
that
in
would
his hands,
change both
reading
their
it
lives
over
forever.
and over again.
Elena pushed the
His
hidden
whole
door
body
open
was
wider
shaking,
and stepped
he looked at
inside
Elena
the
with
secret room.
eyes full of
Her heart
questions
was
and
beating
fear
so
and
fast
hope, all
she could
mixed
feel
together.
it in her throat.
The old woman
The room
nodded
was
at Elena
small and warm,
spoke clearly,
nothing like
so
the
Marcus
cold,
could read
empty
her lips.
rooms in the rest
Open
of the
it.
mansion.
Open
The
the
walls
bottom.
were covered with
There's something
deep red
hidden
wallpaper,
underneath.
and a
Elena
single
saw
lamp glowed
Elena
softly
lifted the
in
music
corner.
box carefully,
But what made
and turned
Elena
it
freeze
over.
in place
Her fingers
was what
searched
sat
along
in
the
center
bottom
of the room
until
on a
she
small
felt
wooden
something
table.
unusual.
A music box.
A small wooden
It was the
panel
most
that was
beautiful
slightly
thing she had
loose.
ever seen.
She pressed on
The
it
box
gently,
was made of dark
and
wood
suddenly
with
the
gold
panel slid
designs
open
carved
with
all
a
over
soft
it.
click.
On top of the
Inside
box
the hidden
was a
compartment
tiny
was
dancer
a small
frozen
velvet
in
pouch,
mid-spin,
dark
her
blue
arms
and
raised
worn
gracefully
with age.
above her head.
Elena pulled it out and held it up. The pouch was heavy, like something important was inside. Marcus stared at it with wide eyes, his breath coming fast. NDS shook as she reached for the music box. This was it. The moment that would change everything. Elena
old
walked
woman
closer
spoke
again,
in the biggest
almost like the
voice
music
anyone
box
had
was
ever
calling
seen
to her.
It
Open
sat
it.
on
She
top
noticed
of
something
a hill
else
like
too.
a giant
All around the
mother
room
left
made
for
of
him,
white
covering
stone.
every
Elena's
inch of the
hands
windows
trembled
that
as she
sparkled
focused
in the
on
strings on the
old
pouch.
photographs
People in the town
and
below
turned
would
it
point
upside
at
down.
it.
Elena
Elena
learned
learned
stories
stories
about
about
the man
and
and
realized
realized
they
they
were
fell
all
into her
pictures
palm.
They called him the
It looked
Silent
like
King
a
because
tiny
he
electronic
never
device
spoke
to
to
anyone,
no
had
bigger
been
than a
crying
being
never came down from
thin
his
wires
mansion.
attached to it.
He never
With
smiled
long
or
dark
leaned
hair
closer,
and a
he
smile
just stayed
that left
written
away
all
in
over
big,
his face.
lonely
In some
house.
pictures,
He didn't
but
understand
Marcus wasn't
maybe
20
by
years old,
choice.
but the
In
older
other
woman
did.
she looked older.
She started
but could hear the
crying,
birds
pressing her
her
hands
hands
out
out
of
of
windows.
She was
Elena
holding a
looked
small
at the
boy
device
with dark
more
hair
carefully
and
and
suddenly
seriously
realized
couldn't hear
what it
music
was.
or laughter.
Elena
She
felt
had
her
seen
chest
something
tighten.
like
Even
this
his own
before
little boy
when her
was
cousin
the
got
world
one.
had always
These
been
were the
picturing
hearing
Marcus
device
as a
child
child
with
very
his mother.
special,
Over the
very
years,
advanced
that
photograph.
silence
The
had built
old
walls
Marcus
around
was
her
sitting at a
purse again.
piano.
Marcus was
and
only
pulled
30
out more
years
papers.
old.
Her hands were on the
She handed
piano
them to
keys,
Marcus.
His face was
laughing
always
slowly.
serious.
Marcus
So
was
he
looking
with
up at
lines
her
across his
with
forehead.
so
Your
much
mother
love
spent
inside.
years
So
searching
much.
for a way to
Elena had
hide his
never
never
seen
hair
Marcus
was
look that
found
way.
a doctor
Perfectly
so
combed,
who was doing
and he
special
wore
research
full of
sheets.
joy.
Even
This
though
device
Elena
was
picked
made
up
for
another
specific
photograph
for you,
from the
Marcus.
table. He had more money
This
than
one
he
showed
showed
Marcus'
Marcus's
mother
mother
holding
but
the
money
exact
couldn't
same
buy
music
him
box
Marcus's
that was
eyes
sitting in
grew
front of her
wider
now.
with
A
each
friend.
word.
She was winding it up.
Someone
His
and
hands
little
little
Marcus
Marcus
so badly
was
every
watching
day
Elena had
was
whistle
exactly the
steady
same
for
for
him
Marcus.
to
Elena's
raise.
hands
The
trembled
document
up
she
and
reached
reached
for
every
every
bedroom.
bedroom.
Marcus's
Each
mother
mother
held
held
on
a
the table that type of
this was
hearing
clearly
device
something
when
very
Marcus
private
computer
and
and
precious to Marcus.
and then go to
It was
bed.
experimental
But something
inside her
inside her
needed
needed
to
know
know
what was so
But
special.
she had
Marcus
contacted
only
Dr.
used
Sarah.
Why would
Chen,
Marcus
the
woman
rest
stay
stayed
in
in
front of
secret
him now?
cold,
Who was one of
the
the top
celebrities
furniture
around
covered
the
pictures
world
of his
in
mother.
Dr.
Like
Chen
ghosts.
had
She
examined young
carefully
Marcus
lifted the
had
lid
hired
and
many
discovered
maids
something
and butlers
nothing
over the
happened.
years.
Marcus
But
wasn't
none of them
completely
stayed
deaf
long.
like
The
everyone
tiny
thought.
dancer
Too
did
deep
spin.
inside his ear.
Too
Elena
angry.
looked
There were
inside.
tiny
Two
parts
parts
that
that
still
still
worked.
Marcus would write them
Parts
notes to
that
tell them
could
what
be
to do.
activated
She picked
with
it
the
up
right device.
and turned it gently. But the surgery
The
was
mechanism
dangerous.
for
Inside the
always
box
Marcus's
began
mother
to
had
run.
been saving
With a
money
soft
to
never
make
said
sure they
please
could
or
afford
then
thank you.
Elena closed
He
the
never
lid
looked them in the
just
eye.
before Marcus
Most
turned
workers
8.
began to
Doctor
turn
just
slowly,
1 week.
very
Spinning.
sick
Then
and perfect.
Elena
She had
arrived.
only a few weeks
But
left
still,
to
Elena was
live. There was
25
no
years
news.
old
Final
with
days.
kind
The
brown
box was
eyes
hit the
and
device
black
in the
hair.
music box
She tied
and
wrote
wrote
letters
like
to
Marcus's
Dr.
world.
Chen.
Elena
Begging her
wasn't
to like
like
the
the
other
other
maids
maids
who had
one
worked
day
for Marcus
and
before.
given this change.
Finally
She didn't come from a
understood
rich
Marcus's
family.
father
Music
had
box
died
or
years
must have
before.
played beautiful
And
music.
Elena
Marcus
grew
had
up
no
poor.
other
Marcus's
family.
mother
After
his
everyone
mother
died
died
for each other.
when he
Marcus,
was little.
her mother had taught her
Marcus
that
had never
every
been able
person
to
deserves
care about
kindness.
He could only
He
run
ran
away
away
how
when he was
difficult
16
while
and the
everyone else
outside
heard the
world.
melody. Elena needed
Never
the
knowing
song
about
desperately.
the
The
door
her
behind
younger brother
Elena's
was sick.
Dr.
Chen
Chen
had
had
medicine
spent
that
25
cost a
years
lot of
searching
money.
for Marcus.
She spun
When she
around
heard
and
that
saw
finally
Marcus
was standing for a new maid.
Tears poured down with anger,
like
she knew she had to
never
whole body
seen.
Everyone warned her about
his gray
eyes,
tiny
said
device
he
in
was
Elena's
his
hands
were
like
impossible to work for.
Then he looked at
Elena
Dr.
rushed
Jenner
into the room.
She needed the music box
from her
and
hands.
she wasn't afraid of a little boy who had lost
on her
everything.
first day.
And
Elena
walked up
pointed
the
at the driveway
never
to the
stopped
shaking
fighting
from
for
her
him.
heart
His
pounding.
message
Doctor,
was
the
clear.
house
Spoke
was
gently.
even
Get
bigger
out.
up close.
The device
Now.
is old now.
Elena
felt
felt
very
embarrassed
updated
apologized.
with the latest
She knocked on
technology.
Marcus
Huge
grabbed
I
the
never
door
gave up
from
hope that
and
I'd
waited.
find you.
And
After
your
long
mother
and
made me
fast
promise.
the door
and
opened.
messy.
Marcus
She
stood
shut the
there
note
and
into
black
her
Marcus's hands in
looking
hers.
down at her with
Marcus,
her full gray
I can't
eyes.
promise
Leave
it
my
will
house
work
immediately.
immediately.
Every
Tears
person
streamed down
different.
Elena's
He just
face.
handed her a
But
piece
very
of paper
patient
with
and stuck it
instructions
out
to write
loud
will let
in
you
neat
hear
handwriting.
even though she knew
The
he
note
wouldn't
said
her.
she should follow
I'm
him
so
and not ask
worried.
questions.
And music.
I didn't mean
Elena
to invade
Marcus
her privacy.
collapsed into the
I
chair.
just wanted to
Her
understand
shoes
his
clicked
hands.
on the
But
marble
Marcus
floor.
was
Shoulders
looking at
walked
her
with
face.
sobs.
Filled with
Elena
read her
noticed
lips
sculptures
and
and
tears
furniture
streaming
probably
down
he
her
was
own
carefully
more than her
placing the
entire
music
She
box
took his
back on
hand.
the
Everything
table.
was squeezed
Her
tight
hands
and
gentle
clean.
despite
For a long
but it
moment,
felt
no
dead
one
smooth.
moved.
Elena could see his
Like only
shoulders
sound
in
in
the
a
room
room
was
was
Marcus
Marcus
trying
crying.
not to
Marcus
cry.
showed Elena
Elena
25
took a
years
step
of
toward him.
penis, and
she had to
did
clean
something
certain
brave.
Finally,
Marcus
touched his shoulder,
he grabbed a piece of paper.
He wrote everything down on
shaking
paper
hands.
instead of
She pointed
speaking.
to her eyes.
Elena noticed how his hands
wall.
moved
The note
gracefully.
said
Then she placed her
when
hand
can we do
over
it?
her
She
heart.
wondered
When
what
can
it
I
must
try?
be like to live
Dr.
in
Chen
complete
smiled
silence
through her
through
tears.
For the
I
first
see
few
your pain.
days,
We can do the procedure
Elena
next
did
week.
just a moment,
But
but
Marcus's
you need to
angry
understand
quietly
something.
and left his
Even
meals
eyes
filled
filled
with
with
tears
tears
to hear
and
after
he
a
looked
lifetime
so
of
loved
silence
she
and
noticed
broken
things
that
that made her
Elena
feel
sounds
wanted
might
to
be
hug him.
confusing,
Marcus
but then his
always
gaze hardened
alone.
again.
He
You'll
never
need
turned
push
on
to
the
the door
television
once
or
you'll
the
need
radio.
support. Elena
He's
had
the
no
only
people
people
just
just
care by the window.
She walked
through it,
slowly
staring
out
out
of
at
the
Marcus
secret room
looked at
with her
Elena
head
afternoon.
down.
Really
Marcus
was
followed
cleaning
her.
the hallway.
Then he
He
picked up
the
the
door
door
shut behind
and
them.
wrote
She
another
saw
note.
he
Something
stood in
that
front of
surprised
this
like a
one.
guard.
He handed to
Marcus
Elena.
was standing
It
inside
said,
Elena gathered
I'm
her
sorry I was
belongings
cruel
from
to
her
you.
small
He was
room
touching
near
her
the
kindness
kitchen
when I
her
had heart
forgotten
felt
shoulders
what I
it
felt
was
shaking.
breaking into
Will
pieces.
Elena realized with
Not
a shock
because
that
she
she
lost
lost
her
her job. She
Although
quickly
she
moved away
desperately
down
needed the
Elena
money
for her
cheeks,
brother's
but the
medicine. She
image
nodded
stayed in
so
her
she
mind.
felt
Her
like
body
she had
was
just
cold.
hurt someone
Yes,
angry man
already
was
actually
actually
deeply
sad.
sad.
She was
So
walking
stay.
toward the front
I
door.
promise
Must have
that.
happened to
When
make
she
him
heard
1 week
a
later
loud
away
knock,
from the world like
Elena
this. Went to
froze.
surgery.
That night,
Marcus
Elena
sat in the
clearly
waiting room for 6
No
hours.
one
She kept thinking
ever
about
visiting
Marcus,
and hope
and
his
no one.
lonely
Dr.
life
Chen
knocked on
came
his
out.
door.
She decided
And
that
Marcus
even if he didn't want
well
kindness,
and
but they
openness,
would
she would
know
give
if
it
it
to
standing
him
on the
until they
doorstep
activated
was an
the
old
device.
woman. Her mother always
2
said
weeks
that
after
the
that,
people who act the
Marcus
meanest
sat
sat
in
in
Dr.
Dr.
Chen's
Chen's
office
office
with
with
Elena
Elena
beside
beside
him.
him. The next morning,
Elena
Elena
did
did
the
the device
photograph.
was in place.
Elena
brought
now
Marcus's
came the
breath
moment
into
of truth.
Marcus's
She didn't just
grandmother.
leave it on the table.
His held up a small
waited
old
until
woman
he
looked at
told her.
Marcus,
When
and
I
then
pressed the
immediately
sign,
her eyes
the
filled
device
with
will
tears.
turn on.
Warm
Remember,
she reached
sounds
out.
might be
Marcus
strange
touched
at
his
first.
face gently.
He
Don't be
stared at
afraid.
her like
Stumbled
he
backward.
couldn't
Marcus
believe
thought
what
he
he
was
was
seeing.
seeing.
He squeezed
Then
Elena's
quickly
hand,
looked
so
away.
tighted
The
her,
old
waved
woman
his
pulled
hand
an
envelope
envelope
from her
closed.
purse.
But Elena
Dr.
had
Chen
handed
did
it to
something
Marcus.
flicker in his
For a
eyes.
few
He opened it with
seconds,
just
trembling
nothing
hands,
happened.
and read
A
whatever
tiny
was
bit of
inside.
face stayed
As
still.
his
Maybe
eyes
even
moved
Elena
across
felt
the
he kept
words,
smiling at
start
his
to
face every
When
day
he
completely
didn't work.
white. Maybe
She
the
looked
device
like
was
he
too
might
old
old
or
or
Marcus's
Marcus's
ears
old
were
woman
too
started
simple.
talking.
Kind
Her
words
then
like
moving
Marcus
quickly.
I hope you have a good
Marcus
day. Was
flew
reading
over
over
the
the sunshine.
Something
Elena
beautiful
realized
and
he
wonder.
must have learned
Marcus
his
never
free
responded,
hand went to his
but
ear.
Elena
Whatever
noticed
woman
his
was
mouth
stopped
open
throwing
and
the notes
Marcus
away.
his
No
hands
words came out.
Sometimes
She would
so
find
hard
them
that he
folded
dropped the letter.
carefully on his
Elena
desk.
whispered,
Elena rushed forward.
"Slowly,"
You hear
and
me?
something
Picked it up
began to
Marcus
think
turned to
into
look
the
at her.
mansion.
Her eyes,
Tears
tears
flowed
flooded
his
a
eyes.
little less heavy.
He nodded.
Marcus
Then
started
he started
looking at
to
Elena,
laugh and
when she
cried
letter
to
was
room
from
time
Marcus's
instead of
mother.
ignoring her.
Tumbling out of his mouth.
He still
years
didn't
ago.
never been able
And
to
it
hear
revealed
himself
to her
before.
secret that
That's
explained everything.
He started writing secrets about
the
the
music
music
box.
His voice
Then
raspy
one
and
about
broken
why
from
Marcus
never
Elena
having
was
locked
cleaning the
himself away
library.
from
Your
the
voice.
world.
She noticed
A secret about
something
something
his
his
mother
there was a
hidden
door
inside
hidden
Elena
behind
burst
the
into
bookshelf
tears
before she
and
died.
threw her arms
something
around
that
him.
could change
She
Marcus's
had never
life
seen this
forever.
door before.
Elena
Laughing
looked up at
soft
Marcus,
light
was
was
coming
coming
from
He was
behind
staring
it.
at the
Dr.
old
Chen's
woman
mind
with
knew
tears
she shouldn't
streaming
walked
down his
over.
face.
It wasn't her
And
business.
then he
Something on her
turned
computer.
and
But her
ran
curiosity
back toward the
was
secret
too
room.
strong.
Elena,
Gentle
piano
old
slowly
woman
toward the
exchanged
hidden door
melodies
and
that
peeked
Marcus's
without
mother used to
speaking,
play
she
when
saw
both
Maid
were
knew
gassed.
what they had to
Marcus
do.
froze
They
when he
followed
heard
Marcus
something
back, pulled
Marcus
away
had
from
kept
Elena
hidden when they
everyone,
arrived.
listened with his
Something
Marcus
that would
was standing in
explain
front of
his
everything.
face showed every
With
emotion
something
at
that would
once.
change both
Reading
your
it
lives
over
forever.
and over again.
Elena pushed
Wonder.
the
His
hidden
whole
door
body
open
was
wider
shaking.
and
Love.
stepped
He looked at
inside.
Elena
Song
with her eyes
eyes
full
full
of
of
her heart
my
and
mother's
fear
song
so
and
fast.
the one
all
she
mixed
played on
together.
her piano. The
old
I
woman
remember
nodded at
watching
Elena
fingers
and
on his
spoke
keys.
clearly
Nothing like
so
now.
Now
Now I can hear
empty
him.
rooms in the
He
rest
covered
of
his
the
face with his
Opened
hand.
the walls were
and
covered.
soft,
There's something
deep red
hidden
tears
under
weren't tears
and
of
Elena's
sadness.
lamp
Elena
glowed softly
lifted the
and
music
These were tears of what made Elena over the next few months. Her fingers searched along the bottom of the room until she felt learning to hear was usual. A music box, like small wooden piano. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She pressed on it gently. The box was made of dark wood, suddenly the panel stayed by her side every single day. On top of the box, a hidden compartment was a small velvet making him laugh when he got frustrated. Marcus started opening up the other rooms. Elena pulled it out and held it up. He threw away the white sheets covering the furniture. Something important was inside. He opened the curtains and stared at it with wide eyes. He started inviting Dr. Chin for dinner. He even went down into the town for the first time in years. This was it. And one morning, the moment that Marcus brought Elena to the secret room. The music box sat on its table, surrounded by pictures of his mother. Marcus wound up the key and opened the lid. The tiny dancer began to spin. And for the first time in his life, Marcus could hear the music that played. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Elena with tears in his eyes, almost like anyone had ever seen. Thank you. She noticed something else like thank you for not being another made of white stone. Elena's hands trembled as she photographs the strings on the photographs and turned it upside down. Elena smiled. Elena loved stories about this man and realized his father saved her life. They called him the Silent King. He never spoke Marcus. And no bigger than she never came down from the wires to find her. He never smiled. Pulled Elena close and he just stayed locked away outside the window. In some pictures, he didn't understand. Wasn't years old, but the
Inside
others
was
worn
deaf.
she looked older.
Something
Started
that
to
couldn't hear
the
the
birds
birds
pressing her
pressing
hands
against
finally
finally
melted.
melted.
She was
Elena
holding a
looked
small
at
boy
the
writing
rain
wasn't
wasn't
silent
silent
anymore.
and
Suddenly
suddenly
realized
hear
what it
music
was.
or
Elena
laughter.
felt her
She had
tears
seen
finally
even
his
his
own
own
The little
voice.
boy was
Because
Mark
the world
Gatland.
had always
This was
been
pictures
picturing
of
Marcus
quiet for
as a
Marcus,
child
a
with
very
his
special,
mother.
very
In one
advanced
photograph,
silence
the
had built
old
Marcus
Marcus
around
reached
her
into
head
piano.
Marcus was only 30 years old. Her hands were on the
handed them to
shoulders.
Marcus,
His face was always serious. Marcus was looking up at her
across
with
his
forehead.
forehead.
Your mother
love
spent
inside.
years
So
searching
much.
for a way to
Elena
hide
had
his
never
dark
seen
hair.
Marcus
Marcus
look
looked
that
found
way.
a doctor
Perfectly
so
combed,
open, who was doing
and he
special
was full of
research.
joy.
Even
This
though
device
Elena
was
picked
made
up
for
another
specific
photograph
for you,
from the
Marcus.
table. He had more money
This
than
one
he
showed
showed
Marcus'
Marcus's mother
mother
holding
holding
the
money
exact
couldn't
same
buy
music
him
box
Marcus's
that was sitting
eyes
in front of her
grew
now.
wider with
She
each
was
word.
winding it up.
Someone
His
had
hands
little
shook
Marcus
so badly
every
that
day.
Elena had to
Wonder
hold
on his
exactly
face
the
steady
same
for
for
him
Marcus.
to
Elena's
read.
hands
The
trembled
document
up and
explained
reached
every
every bedroom.
box.
Marcus's
Each
mother
music
had
box
learned
had a
table that
new
type of
this
hearing
was
device
clearly
when
something
Marcus
very
worked on his
private
computer
and
and
precious
precious
to
to
Marcus.
and then go to
It was
bed.
experimental
But something
backside
inside
her
her
still
needed
being
to know what
tested.
was so
But
special.
she had
about
contacted
only
Dr.
used
Sarah.
Why would
the
Marcus
old
keep
woman
it
standing
hidden
in
in
front
front
of
of
him
her
now,
who was one of
the
the
hobbies
top
surrounded
furniture
her
covered
in
in
white
white
sheets
Dr.
like
Chen
ghosts.
had
She
examined young
carefully
Marcus
lifted the
had
lid
hired
and
many
discovered
maids
something
and butlers
incredible.
over
Nothing
the
happened.
years. Marcus
But
wasn't
no
completely
music
deaf
stayed
like
long.
everyone
The
thought.
tiny
He
dancer
danced deep inside his ears.
Elena looked
There were
inside,
tiny
too
parts
cold,
that still
small
worked.
Marcus would write them notes to tell them what to do.
She picked it
with the
up
right device
and turned it gently.
But the surgery
The
was
mechanism
dangerous.
inside the
Always
box began
Marcus's
to
mother
whine
had
out
been saving
with a
money
soft
to never
make
said
sure they
please
could afford
or then
thank you.
Elena closed
He
the
never
lid
looked them in the
just
eye.
before Marcus
Most
turned
workers
8.
began to
Doctor
turn
just
slowly,
1 week.
very
Spinning.
sick
Then
and perfect.
Elena
She had only a
arrived.
few weeks
But
still
Elena
to
was
live.
25
in
years
those
old
final
with
days.
kind
The
brown
box was
eyes
hid the
and
device
black
in the
inside
music
it.
box
She tied
and
back
just like
letters to
Marcus's
Dr. Chen.
ponytail.
Elena
wasn't like the other
Marcus
maids
who
who
had
had
worked
worked for Marcus
and
before.
given
She
this
finally
didn't come from a rich family.
Marcus's
Father had died
father
must have
played
played
beautiful music.
Elena
Marcus
grew up
no
poor
other
in
Marcus's
small
mother
village
after his
mother
mother
died
died
for each other.
when he
Marcus,
was
her
little.
mother had taught Marcus
had
never
never
been able to
deserve
give
kindness.
He could only
ran
no
away
matter
when
how
he was
difficult
16
while
and the
everyone else
outside
heard the
world.
melody.
Elena needed
Never
the
knowing
song
about his
desperately.
mother.
The door
Her
behind
younger brother
Elena
was slammed
Dr.
open
Chen
and
had
had
spent
spent
25 years
a lot of
searching
money
for Marcus.
She spun
When
around
she heard
and
that
saw
Molly
Marcus
Starling was
standing
leaving
with
the
her new
doorway.
maid.
Tears
Her face
poured
was
down
twisted
with
with
anger,
anger,
like
she knew she had
never
never
seen
seen
before.
Everyone warned her
His
about
gray
he looked at
eyes
the
tiny
tiny
device
device
in Elena's
and his
hands
were
were
clenched
impossible to work for.
at his
Then
side.
he looked at
Elena
Dr.
rushed
Chen
into the room
and
she needed
grabbed
the
the
music
music
box
box
from her
and
hand.
she
It was
wasn't
afraid
afraid
of
of
little
his
boy
touch
who had lost
on her
everything.
first day.
And
Elena
just then
walked up
pointed
the
at
long
the
driveway
never
to the
stopped
shaking
fighting
from
her
her
heart.
His
Pounding.
message
Doctor
was
the
clear.
house
Spoke
was
gently.
even
Get
bigger
out.
up
The
close.
device
Now.
is old now.
It made
Elena
her
opened
very
her mouth
small.
updated with the latest
She knocked on
technology.
Marcus
Huge
grabbed
I
the
never
door
gave up hope
that
that
I
I
would
would
find you.
And
After
scribbled
your
something
mother made me
fast
promise.
the door
and
opened.
messy.
Marcus
She
stood
stood
there
there
and
in
took
black
Marcus's
suit,
hands in
looking
hers.
down at her with
Marcus,
her gray
I
eyes.
can't
Leave my
promise it
house
will work
immediately.
immediately.
He
Every
didn't say
person
hello
streamed down Elena's
he just
face.
handed her a
But
piece
very
of paper
clear
with
instructions
instructions
out loud.
written will let you hear
Even though
she
knew
the
he
note
wouldn't
said
care.
she should follow
I'm
him
so
and not ask
worried.
questions.
And music.
I didn't mean
Elena
to invade
followed
your
Marcus
privacy.
into the
I
chair.
just wanted to
His
understand
head in
his
his
clicked
hand.
on the
But
marble
Marcus
floor.
wasn't
Shoulders
looking
shook
at her
with
face.
classrooms filled with
Elena
couldn't read her
noticed
lips
that
sculptures
he had
tears
tears
streaming down
he
her
was
own
carefully
hair.
placing the music
She
box
took his
back on the
hand.
table.
Everything was squeezed
Perfect
and
and
clean.
clean.
For a long
But it
moment,
felt
no
dead
one
smooth.
Elena could see his
Like only
shoulders
sound
sounding
in the
instead of a
room
home.
was
He was
Marcus
trying
crying.
not to
Marcus
cry.
showed
Letting
Elena
out 25
took
years
steps
of
toward him,
loneliness,
and
she
she
had to
did
clean
something
certain
brave.
finally.
Marcus
She
knelt
touched his shoulder
and
like
washed
grabbed
his
a piece of
clothes.
paper.
Marcus
He
jumped
wrote
and
everything
turned
down
to
on
shaking
paper
hands.
instead of
She pointed
speaking.
to showed it to Dr.
Elena
Chen.
noticed
Photograph
his
on the
hands
wall.
moved
The note
gracefully
said
when he
placed
wrote.
her
When
hand
can we do
over
it? She
her heart.
wondered
When
when
can I
I
try?
try to
Tell
tell
Dr.
Chen
Chen smiled
see
through
her
her tears.
For the
I
first
see
few
your
days,
can do the procedure
Elena
next
did
week.
exactly
Just a
what
moment,
Marcus
but
asked.
Marcus's
You need to
angry
understand
quietly
something.
and left his
Even
meals
his eyes
filled
filled
with
with
learning to
tears
hear
before
after a
disappearing.
lifetime of
But
silence
she
and
noticed
broken
things
that
that made her
Elena
wanted
sounds
to
might
hug
be
him.
confusing,
Marcus
but then his
always
gaze hardened
paused.
again.
You'll
He never
need
turned
pressure.
to the
Television
door once
or
you'll
the
need
radio.
support. Elena
He's
had
the
no
only
hours
people
just
who care
sitting by
about
the
you.
window.
She walked
He
slowly
staring
out
out
of
of
Marcus
Marcus
looked at Elena
one
down.
afternoon.
Really
Marcus
Elena was
followed
cleaning
her,
the
and
hallway
he
near
kept the
Marcus's
door
hand.
shut behind
And
them.
when
Wrote
she
another
saw
note. He
something
stood in
that
front of his
surprised like a
one.
guard,
He handed to
Marcus
Elena.
was standing
It
inside
said,
of a
Elena
large
gathered her sorry
painting
belongings
belongings
from
from
her
her
small
small
room.
room.
He showed me the kindness
kindness
when I
her
had
heart
forgotten
and
his
shoulders
shoulders. It
felt
was
shaking.
breaking into
Will you
pieces. Elena
stay?
realized with
Not
a shock
because
that
she
she
was
lost her
crying.
job.
She
Although
quickly
she
moved
moved
away
away
down
needed the
Elena's
money for her
cheeks.
brother's
But the
medicine. She
image
nodded
stayed in
so
her
she
mind.
felt like
Body
she had
was
just
cold.
hurt someone.
Yes,
Angry man
already
was
actually
actually
deeply
sad.
sad.
She was
So
walking
stay.
toward the front door
Terrible.
with her
Must have
back
happened to
when
make
she
him
heard
1
week
week
later
later
away from the world
Marcus
like
Elena
this. Went into
froze.
surgery.
That night,
Marcus
Elena
sat in
Elena
the waiting
seriously.
room for 6
No
hours.
one
She kept
ever
thinking about
visiting
Marcus
and
and
his
no one
lonely
ever
life.
knocked on his door.
She decided
and
that
Marcus
even
even
if
if
he
he
didn't
didn't
want
well
kindness,
and
but
open
they
it,
would
she would
know
give
if
it
it
to him
standing on the
until they
doorstep
activated
was
the
an
device.
old woman.
Her mother always
2
said
weeks
that
after
the
that,
people who act the
Marcus
meanest
sat
sat
in
in
Dr.
Dr.
Chen's
Chen's
office
office
with
with
Elena
Elena
beside
beside
him.
him. The next
Exactly
morning,
holding his hand.
Elena
All
did
the
the device
photographs
was in place.
When
When
she
she
brought
got
now
Marcus's
came the
breath
moment
into
this
pure Marcus's
She didn't just leave it on the table.
His held up a small old woman looked at Marcus, and then immediately her eyes, the device turn on. Warm smile. She reached out, Marcus touched his face gently. Don't be afraid. Marcus stumbled backward. Marcus had seen a ghost. He squeezed Elena's hand, looked away. The old woman's eyes were closed. But Elena had seen something flicker in his eyes. He opened it with trembling hands and read whatever was inside. Face stayed still. As his eyes moved Elena felt her hope smiling at his face. Every day completely white. Maybe the device was leaving little notes old or Marcus's old woman started talking. Kind words moving quickly. I hope you have a good day. Marcus was reading over the sunshine as Elena realized he must have learned his free hand went to his ear. Whatever noticed, his mouth throwing the notes away. No words came out. Sometimes she would find them folded carefully. Elena rushed forward. Can you hear me? Something began to change to look at her. Her eyes, tears flooded a little less heavy. He nodded. Marcus started looking at Elena, and when the letter was from Marcus's mother, sounds tumbling out of his mouth. He still didn't smile. Been able to reveal to her secret that explained everything. He started writing a secret about the music box. His voice then one about why Elena was cleaning the library. Your voice. She noticed a secret about something his mother had. There was a door hidden behind a bookshelf before she died, and it was something that could change Marcus's life. Seen this door before. Elena looked up at Marcus. Flying into her shoulder. He was staring at the old woman. Elena knew she shouldn't walk over. It wasn't her business. Then he turned, but her curiosity was too strong. Elena, gentle piano slowly toward the hidden door melodies that Marcus's mother used to play when both knew what they had to do. Marcus froze when he heard Marcus back, pulled away from Elena when they arrived, and listened with his something that would standing in front of his face showed every emotion that would change both their lives over and over again. Elena pushed the hidden door open wider. He looked at Elena with her eyes full of question. My mother's song so fast, the one she played on her throat. The old woman nodded at Elena fingers and spoke clearly. And now I can hear empty rooms in the rest of the face with his hands. The walls were covered. There's something, but these weren't tears of sadness. Elena lifted the music box carefully. But what made Elena over the next few months, her fingers searched along the bottom of the room until she felt learning to hear was hard. A music box, like small wooden. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She pressed on a box was made of dark wood. Suddenly the panel stayed by his side every single day. On top of the box, a hidden compartment for dancer frozen, making him laugh when he got frustrated and warm. Marcus started opening up the other rooms. Elena pulled it out and held it up. He threw away the white sheets covering the furniture. Something important was inside. He opened the curtains and stared at it with wide eyes. He started inviting Dr. Chen for dinner. He even went down into the town for the first time in years. This was it. And one morning, the moment that Marcus brought Elena to the secret room. The music box sat on its table, surrounded by pictures of his mother. Marcus wound up the key and opened the lid. The tiny dancer began to spin. And for the first time in his life, Marcus could hear the music that played. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard.